Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the 56th Annual Convention and Annual General Meeting of the Manitoba School Boards Association. As we gather together with a shared purpose and a steadfast determination to do what is best for our communities, we acknowledge with respect the history, culture, and language of the peoples with whom Treaty 1 was signed and the land upon which we are meeting. We acknowledge our responsibility as treaty members and honor the heritage and gifts of the Métis people. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and commit to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous peoples and communities in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. I stand before you this morning as President of Manitoba School Boards Association, Chair of the Interlake School Division Board of Trustees, husband to Alicia, Dad to Lucy, who will be starting kindergarten in September, and to Maggie, who turns 2 in May. As an uncle to Liam, who is in grade 1, and to Cohen, who will be in kindergarten in 2021, and as a friend, a colleague, a trustee to many families throughout the Interlake who have children, grandchildren, friends, fellow citizens, either in our schools as students or as staff. And I am worried. But like all of you, I don't really know for sure why I'm worried. If I'm worrying too much or not enough, or if I should be worried at all. In any case, I am worried because I know as a trustee, a parent, and a community member in the Interlake School Division, I have no interest in trying to explain to someone from Ericsdale why the school in Balmoral is worthy of music programming that sees their middle year students benefiting from resources that allow for collaboration between their school and Stonewall Collegiate a few miles up the road. I would have very little patience for the time it would take to explain to someone from Pinawa who perhaps has never been to Argyle why the 100-plus-year-old Brant Argyle School is the heart and soul of that tiny prairie community and why its local school board should be protecting it. Imagine my frustration in trying to advocate for the important alternative education program that exists centrally in a non-school space within our school division to someone from St. Clements, Grand Marais, Beausejour, or Oak Bank. It's not that these people wouldn't be well-intentioned. It's not that they wouldn't eventually figure it out to some satisfactory extent. It's that they shouldn't have to in the first place. Because there is no evidence that student outcomes in any of those communities that I've listed would improve as a result of being a part of a much larger school division. And worse, the time and taxpayer money wasted in all of the explaining and familiarization and harmonization could have been spent on actually working to improve learning environments and conditions so that, you guessed it, we might see sustained improvements in student outcomes. I'm being strategic in my selection of these communities as I explain to you my worries. Worries that I'm sure you can all relate to, whether you represent an urban division or a rural division. The communities that I've referenced are all part of what is now the 61,000 square kilometer expanse known as the Interlake Eastman Regional Health Authority, serving a population of 129,000 people from as far north as Gypsumville on the west side of Lake Winnipeg and as far north as Barons River on the east side of the lake, to the North Perimeter Highway at the intersection of Number 6 Highway in the southwest, and to West Hawk Lake on the Ontario border in the region's southeast corner. I'm using this analogy to frame up my concerns because, as you've undoubtedly heard, some of the speculation out there is that the K-12 Education Review is going to recommend that school divisions mirror the boundaries of this province's regional health authorities. And of course, I'm forced to build my case and write this speech based on speculation because that's all we've got to work with. I'll come back to that. I'll point out here that this is not a criticism of the work of the fine staff of the IERHA. And I'm not just saying that because my dad happens to be in the Selkirk Regional Health Center right now, recovering from surgery. Like our staff in education, healthcare workers in Manitoba are very good at what they do. But not unlike those who work in education, healthcare workers and the regional health authorities they work for are at the mercy of the provincial government's directives on many aspects of their field. Selkirk Regional Health Center is Manitoba's newest health facility and is indeed a beautiful example of the importance of centralized resources when it makes sense to do it. When the 129,000 Manitobans in the IERHA are having grave medical emergencies or are in need of complex and specialized treatment, there is no doubt that it is the best place for them. And it is a nice new alternative to the Grace, Seven Oaks, or Health Sciences Center. But the reality is that the vast majority of basic day-to-day healthcare needs for the people of this province can, should, and used to be dealt with very effectively at the local level, in local healthcare facilities, before regional health authorities were created by the Filmon government. With the creation of regional health authority boards appointed by government, often, but not always, along partisan lines, the voices of local people in the provision of local healthcare in local hospitals, clinics, and long-term care facilities was in many cases all but erased. Of course, this only exacerbated the problems of doctor shortages, ER closures, ambulance wait times, and the list goes on. I'm not trying to imply that the creation of regional health authorities caused these problems exclusively. In fact, they were already cropping up in the 90s. But there are too many Manitobans today who would tell you that centralized regional decision-making has damaged the provision of healthcare in their communities. When a group of people, none of which reside in or anywhere near close to a particular community, come to a meeting to discuss the shortage of doctors in that same community, it's not going to be a productive conversation without representation of those impacted families at the table. That's just common sense. In the now decades-long absence of local hospital boards that were once the long-standing respected authorities at the heart of decision-making in this province's healthcare sector, many communities have now struck local committees to liaise with the regional health authorities on the behalf of their citizens. Local people are proactively reinserting their voices back into the decision-making conversations for their local hospitals, clinics, and long-term care facilities. In other words, for the good of their fellow citizens, they are forcing the process to come full circle when it comes to local voice and local choice. As with healthcare, we know that dissolution of the local voice in education would be costly, damaging, and unsustainable. As local school boards, we represent the community perspective in the most important decisions when it comes to our local schools. While we always, through a governance lens, have important decision-making and oversight authority when it comes to staffing and program support allocation, student and staff mental and physical health safeguards, the more severe student and staff disciplinary matters, and of course the annual budget. Much of what we deal with is sensitive and confidential, and while that can pose challenges in tight-knit school communities, both in rural areas and in urban neighborhoods, centralizing those decision-making authorities does not make any of those issues that we deal with go away. And certainly there is no logic in asking people from the city or from other communities to come in without any frontline knowledge of what's happening in our local schools to try to address these issues. But here we are. 415 days since the start of the K-12 review, when Minister Gertsen blew the door wide open on the prospect of forced amalgamation and elimination of school boards. And from then until today, there has been not one official word that would lead us to believe that those outcomes can be ruled out, despite the fact that there has never been any basis for them in the first place. I know you can all empathize with the stress that this has caused. When the review was announced, I was 33. This September, I plan on celebrating my 64th birthday. School board trustees, like all of us in education, don't do well with a lack of information. To the contrary, it is our job to seek out as much information as possible in order to make the best decisions we can as effectively and as efficiently as we can. Right now, the superintendents and secretary-treasurers in the room will kind of glance at each other knowingly, because sometimes we as trustees might ask too many questions. But we ask the questions from a place of accountability, empathy, and a desire to make things better for our students, staff, and families. Please join me in thanking our senior admin teams for supporting us in our work that we do. On one hand, we've heard governments say in the last 14 months that they will hold off on all communication about the future of education in this province until the recommendations have been made by the Review Commission, and that further considerations and consultations may be a part of the path forward, depending on those recommendations. On the other hand, we've heard governments say that they plan to enact on all of the recommendations of the Commission, every single one, even though they have yet to know what they are. So it follows naturally that in the complete absence of clear communication, combined with mixed messaging from government and the commissioners themselves, speculation has been rampant. I'm sure we all have our source. You know who I mean. We all have that neighbor whose sister-in-law used to work with the guy who was married to the auntie of the former girlfriend of the special assistant to one of the acting associate deputy ministers of the department that doesn't even exist anymore. And he or she has heard this or that or the other about the first draft of the review or the 14th draft of the review. You know who I mean. We all have one of those sources. Stop listening to them. A year ago, at our 2019 convention, I encouraged you to join with us at MSBA Executive to run toward the problem, in keeping with the message of our keynote speaker, Mr. Mike Lipkin. So many of you took us up on that challenge, and I am so proud of that. In spite of not knowing what the future holds, at public consultation after consultation throughout this province, we on MSBA Executive would walk into the room and be emboldened by your presence there. You will recall that as your advocacy association, we did not and would not mandate your attendance at any of the events of the K-12 Review Commission. We strongly encouraged that you be there, and you were in impressive numbers. You were eloquent, passionate, and stubborn, sometimes in the face of ill-mannered and questionable commentary about the role of the local school boards. At several of those consultations, there were people there whose whole job was to bash the local school board, and there was always a trustee or 7 right beside them, making sure that the proper message was being shared. Most importantly, you were respected. You were respected by the vast majority of those in attendance at the Commission's public consultations. Your public respected you with their words and with their actions. Commissioners and Dr. Avis Glaze received earful after earful about the value of local boards from teachers, parents, administrators, community members, municipal councils, senior administrators, you name it. This can't be overstated. Moreover, at the end of every single consultation event, one of the commissioners would say to all of us assembled, something along the lines of, "This is your education review. What you tell us is what we will recommend to government." On more than one occasion, I made sure that I was seated beside Dr. Glaze during those closing comments, and I would say to her, "Did you write that down? Because I did." A number of years ago, school boards were eliminated in New Brunswick, and in recent months, their government has announced that locally elected boards will be reinstated in 2020 in order to bring back the voice of New Brunswick communities in public education in that province. In Nova Scotia, following last year's deplorable overnight elimination of school boards by that province's government, momentum continues to build at the grassroots level among teachers, families, and average Nova Scotians who instantly recognized that they had been led astray by their government when it said that the Ministry of Education could somehow unilaterally meet the needs of individual communities that had otherwise been met by their local board. Closer to home, we need to look no further than Ontario in the east and to Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia in the west for crystal clear examples of the value of respectful and engaged relationships between school boards, locally elected school boards, and their provincial government when it comes to generating improved student outcomes. In spite of so many examples of positive reinforcement of the value of school boards, both within this province as part of the review and across this country, I, like you, am still worried. And I, like you, am often overwhelmed by the pessimistic, unproductive, and apathetic speculation that has monopolized our thoughts for months on end. Which leads me towards the conclusion of this address. It's time to stop worrying. You as individual boards have decisions to make. If you believe that your community thinks that the best thing for their local schools is for your division to amalgamate, then tackle that. Start to prepare. Take the advice of yesterday's keynote, Julie Wilson, and embrace the risk. Ask the tough questions and get out of your comfort zone. Even if amalgamation is what your community might be in favor of, don't just sit there and let it happen to you, to your communities, to your schools, your staff, and your students. When you sought election, you signed up for greater responsibility than that. Your MSBA executive wants to help you. At the same time, there are many of you here today that know that your communities not only oppose the prospect of amalgamations, they would be damaged by it. So what are you doing about it? Are you rocking the boat? Are you asking the tough questions? Are you ready to push back when it is necessary in support of your vision? You might be, but there's more that you can do to build that capacity. Your MSBA executive wants to help you with that as well. You'll recall from the visual yesterday in Julie Wilson's keynote, the visual of the hero's journey. We as school boards are collectively stuck somewhere along the right-hand side of that circle between the 12 o'clock mark and the 6 o'clock mark. We've heard the call to adventure. It came to us on January 23rd, 2019. We are all filled with uncertainty. Some of you have sought out the mentor, who Julie Wilson referred to as this association. Some of you have not. Some of you have taken action. We have all found our tribe, but none of us have taken the plunge into the abyss because we don't know where the abyss is, because it is the government's to reveal. If we are sincere in our commitment to do what is best for the students, staff, and families in our communities, and if we are steadfast in our belief that they are all best served by their locally elected school board, then we must stop waiting to be pushed into that abyss, and we must take the leap together. Regardless of the recommendations of the K-12 Education Review, we have a moral obligation to continue to lead for the sake of our collective futures, to stand up and oppose instead of accepting in defeat, to engage with respect instead of turning away in self-pity, to do what we committed to do for the people in our communities who need our trusteeship the most, our students and their families. If you are prepared to face this challenge head on, I will be right there beside you, and I look forward to it. Thank you.